Welcome to the Lost Media and Broadcast YouTube channel. Before we begin, forget everything you've heard about Marilyn Monroe, because the deeper investigators looked into her final hours, the less the official story seemed to explain, and what they discovered would fuel one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries. She was the most photographed woman on Earth, the face that defined an entire generation, but behind Hollywood's brightest smile was a secret that may have followed her to the grave. Hollywood's brightest star was found dead in her bedroom. Hollywood's brightest star was found dead in her bedroom. She was only 36, a woman the world believed had everything: beauty, fame, money, powerful friends, and a name that could light up every screen in America. But in the early hours of August 5, 1962, Marilyn Monroe was gone. Officially, her death was ruled a probable suicide by overdose. But then came the questions. Claims of missing evidence, strange phone calls, timeline gaps, conflicting statements, and powerful names whispered behind closed doors. This documentary separates documented facts from theories and unconfirmed claims. No conclusive evidence has proven murder, political involvement, or organized crime involvement, but more than 60 years later, one question still refuses to die. Was Marilyn Monroe truly alone in her final hours? August 4, 1962. Los Angeles was glowing. The movie studios were still selling dreams. Hollywood still worshipped beauty. And Marilyn Monroe, the woman millions believed had everything, was inside her Brentwood home. Not on a film set, not at a glamorous party, not surrounded by flashing cameras, but alone inside a quiet Spanish-style house. It was the only home Marilyn Monroe ever owned, a place she had hoped would give her peace, a place where she could rebuild herself. But behind the image, behind the smile, behind the voice the world adored, Marilyn was struggling. She had dealt with depression, insomnia, emotional pain, and prescription medication. But she was not just fading away. She was still trying, still planning, still fighting for control over her career, still searching for stability in a world that had consumed her. That night, Marilyn was not just a Hollywood icon. She was Norma Jean, a vulnerable woman inside a silent house caught between hope and collapse. And before sunrise, that house would become part of one of the most haunting mysteries in Hollywood true crime history. Sometime after midnight, something seemed wrong. Marilyn's bedroom light was still on. Her door was locked. There was no answer. Her housekeeper became concerned. Then Marilyn's psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, was called to the home. He entered the bedroom by breaking through a window, and inside he found Marilyn Monroe dead. Reports described her lying face down on the bed, a telephone receiver near her hand, medication bottles nearby. The woman who once stopped the world with a smile could no longer answer. Police were called, doctors arrived, the scene was examined, and very quickly the tragedy became international news. But almost immediately, questions began to form. Why did the timeline feel uncertain? Who was called first? When were authorities contacted? And why would so many details later become disputed? At first, the scene appeared simple. A tragic overdose, a lonely night, a movie star gone too soon. But as investigators and journalists looked closer, the story became much harder to close. The official conclusion was probable suicide. The cause of death was acute barbiturate poisoning. In simple words, a fatal overdose. For officials, the explanation appeared clear. Marilyn had a documented history of emotional suffering. She had used prescription medication. She had struggled with insomnia, and those closest to her knew she had been in pain. So to many, the official story made sense. A vulnerable woman, a dangerous amount of medication, a tragic final night. But the public did not simply accept it, because this was not just anyone. This was Marilyn Monroe, the face of Hollywood glamour, the woman who seemed untouchable. And when someone that famous dies suddenly, the world does not only mourn, it investigates, it imagines, it doubts. Newspapers covered every detail. Fans were devastated. Hollywood was shaken. And across America, people asked the same question. How could the brightest star in the world disappear so suddenly, inside her own bedroom? The official answer existed, but for many people, it did not feel complete. And this is where the Marilyn Monroe mystery began to grow. Then came the strange details. There were questions about timing, questions about who was called, questions about why authorities were not contacted earlier, questions about the condition of the room, questions about witness statements, and questions about what evidence was preserved. Some of these questions were based on real inconsistencies. Others came from rumors. Others grew over time as the legend became bigger than the case. But one claim became especially explosive. Later came stories of a missing diary, a private diary where Marilyn may have written personal thoughts, private conversations, or sensitive details. No confirmed diary has ever proven a murder. No verified diary has changed the official cause of death. But the claim became powerful because of what it suggested. If such a diary existed, and that remains unproven, what might it have contained? Names, secrets, fears, conversations with powerful people. That possibility helped turn Marilyn's death from a tragedy into a mystery. Some believe the missing diary story is part of why the public never fully accepted the official explanation. Others argue it is mythology, built around a woman whose fame made every rumor feel believable. But by then the damage was done. The official story had shadows around it, and once those shadows appeared, they led directly to the most sensitive part of the case: power, politics, and the people Marilyn knew. Marilyn Monroe did not live an ordinary life. She moved through rooms most people never see: Hollywood executives, movie stars, millionaires, politicians, powerful men, powerful institutions. And in 1962, one public moment connected her forever to American political history. Marilyn famously sang "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" to John F. Kennedy. The performance became iconic, but after her death it also became part of the mystery. Rumors later claimed Marilyn had deeper relationships with John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy. These claims remain disputed, and no conclusive public evidence proves either man caused her death. But the rumors mattered because they changed how people viewed the case. In conspiracy theories, fear of scandal became the central idea. If Marilyn knew private things, if she was emotionally fragile, if powerful people feared embarrassment, then some began asking whether her death was only personal or whether it had become politically dangerous. A Hollywood star, a locked bedroom, a telephone receiver near her hand, and names that still make people whisper. But powerful connections alone do not prove a conspiracy. They only explain why people kept looking. Over time, several theories formed around the Marilyn Monroe death. Some were careful, some were dramatic, some were built on real questions, others were built on speculation. The official explanation remains probable suicide by overdose. Supporters of this conclusion point to Marilyn's emotional struggles, medication use, insomnia, and history of personal pain. What weakens complete certainty? The disputed timeline, the confusing witness accounts, and the emotional difficulty many people have accepting that someone so famous could die in such a lonely way. Another possibility is accidental overdose. Some believe Marilyn may not have intended to die. They argue that medication, exhaustion, and emotional distress could have created a fatal mistake. What weakens this theory? The official ruling leaned toward probable suicide. Then there is the cover-up theory. This theory does not always claim murder. Some versions claim that people may have hidden embarrassing information after her death: private notes, phone calls, personal connections, reputation-damaging details. What weakens this theory? A lack of hard proof. Then comes the darker political theory. This theory claims Marilyn may have been silenced because of powerful connections, but no conclusive evidence has proven this. And finally, the organized crime theory. Some writers and researchers have suggested that criminal figures may have had interest in exploiting Marilyn's relationships or reputation. Again, this remains theory, not proven fact. That is the truth about this case. The theories are dramatic, the questions are real, but drama is not evidence, and suspicion is not proof. Still, 20 years later, the case was serious enough for authorities to look again. In 1982, the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office reviewed Marilyn Monroe's death. By then, the rumors had become impossible to ignore. Books had been written, interviews had surfaced, theories had multiplied, and the public wanted answers. The review did not find credible evidence of murder. For officials, that mattered. It meant the darkest claims could not be proven, but for the public, the review did not erase doubt because the emotional questions remained. Why did some accounts seem to change? Why did the timeline feel unclear? Why did so many people believe something was missing? And why did Marilyn's death feel unfinished? Over the years, writers and investigators pointed to alleged tapes, missing notes, private conversations, and disputed witness statements. But many of those claims depend on memories recorded years later, second-hand stories, unverified accounts, and people who may have had reasons to exaggerate. Memory changes, rumors grow, a tragic death becomes a legend, and a legend becomes almost impossible to separate from the truth. But sometimes even weak stories survive because the official story leaves just enough empty space for suspicion to grow. So after all these years, are we closer to the truth, or only deeper inside the myth? Marilyn Monroe became more than an actress. She became an image, a fantasy, a headline, a symbol of beauty, a symbol of loneliness, a symbol of everything Hollywood gives and everything it takes away. But before she was Marilyn, she was Norma Jean, a woman who wanted love, safety, respect, a home, a future. She died young, she died in pain, and officially her death was ruled a probable suicide by overdose, but public doubt remains because her death sits at the intersection of everything people distrust. Hollywood, politics, power, fame, secrets, and silence. Maybe the truth is simple. Maybe Marilyn took her own life. Maybe it was an accidental overdose. Maybe mistakes were made after her death that made everything look more suspicious than it was. Or maybe there are details we will never fully know. But one thing is certain. Marilyn Monroe's death did not end her story. It transformed her into one of the most haunting celebrity mysteries in history. Not because there is proof of murder, not because every theory is true, but because the world looked at her final night and felt that something was missing. Maybe the real mystery is not only how Marilyn Monroe died. Maybe the real mystery is why the world never accepted the answer, because more than 60 years later, people still look at that bedroom, that phone, those pills, those missing pieces, and feel the same chill. Something was left unfinished, something was left unsaid, and somewhere between Hollywood's brightest spotlight and its darkest closed door, Marilyn Monroe disappeared into legend. So the question remains, did Marilyn Monroe take her final secret to the grave, or did the world simply refuse to let her rest?